line, big Times Square. We were expecting a very special human interest report from our roving reporter, Vincent Scoop Barbarino, who has been conducting women in the street interviews since last Tuesday. Unfortunately, we haven't heard from him since last Tuesday. Vinny, if you can hear my voice, cool when you catch your breath.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, what are we talking about today?
And we're back here at the college right now, the high school radio stations.
That's right. We're talking about student radio, high school radio station episodes. And yeah, this is like so many sitcoms nowadays, the Sitcom Study is a serialized, continuous effort because
we saw the radio station in the last episode where they were using it to save the Max. And now in this episode, we decided to dive into all the other, not all, but a lot of the other ones that have radio station.
Interestingly, the Saved by the Bell episode where they have their own high school radio station is probably the most impactful version of this. That's the one that I go to when I think of this sitcom trope. And so it was kind of wild that that was also the episode about the hangout. So yeah, we've got that one fresh in our minds. So we'll cover properly 4 sitcom episodes like we always do. But then for me anyway, that Saved by the Bell episode is also going to kind of loom large in our minds.
Yes.
But before we get into the shows, this is one that I know you've got a lot of experience with. So let's just get right to it.
Say more, Jay.
What is your history with student radio, the world of student radio?
So we were very adamant that we were not student radio. We were students working at a professional radio station or at professional radio stations. But yes, so in college, I worked at NPR. I worked at a commercial radio station that was both AM and FM. And on the FM side of things, it was rock radio. It was Rock 104. And I was an overnight DJ. Yeah. And
that was when you were Amy Fox?
That was Amy Fox. Okay. Overnights. Yeah. And then I did the morning drive on the AM news radio. So I would do the overnight shift and
were you somebody else? Was this like a Clark Kent situation?
Yes, I was Amy Morris on news. I was a real
Nobody
human.
Thought it was strange that Amy Morris sounded so much like Amy Fox?
I'm going to guarantee that there was zero crossover listeners unless you were students working at these stations.
Fair enough. All right. So that was your experience. And would you, at any sort of going into this, any sort of feelings or anything about, student radio or anything
like that? Well, so I had always wished, because we didn't have anything like this in my high school, but we had, someone would get nominated, or a few people would get nominated every year to do the announcements over the PA. And that, it was really funny. And my friend Chuck, we've talked about it on the podcast before, my friend Chuck was on it, and he was so funny. And everyone, no one knew. He was this total dork, and he was in drama with me. And his senior year, he sort of stumbled into this doing the announcements thing. And he was so funny. I mean, he was he was a little Chris Farley kind of, he wasn't as big as that, but he was very, very funny. And yeah, we all were oh, he's going to end up on SNL. He didn't. He was a cop. But, I always kind of wished that my high school had that kind of opportunity, because I think it would have been fun.
Yeah, we didn't have this in my high school. The closest thing we had was a little digital banner in the cafeteria, kind of like the thing that tells you when the next subway is coming. A little thing with little red dots that scrolled words, and they would have different little announcements and funny little jokes and stuff. And I think Yeah, like you're saying, we may have had a student that helped out with the morning announcements on the PA. We'll get into in some of these shows whether these quote-unquote radio stations are actually broadcast on the radio or are just on their school's PA system.
Right.
But yeah, we didn't have that in my high school. There was a student radio station at my college, friend of the pod, Jordan White, Marvel Comics editor. He was really into that. I don't know, honestly, if I even knew about it. I probably did, but I was busy doing other things. But what I'll say is the thing that really had me salivating across all of these sitcom episodes that are from the 80s and 90s are the analog recording equipment. All of the reel-to-reel decks and patch bays and wires and buttons. You know, I never worked at a radio station per se, but I made my own. Nowadays, they would be called a podcast. My friend Ellis and I made our own little comedy radio shows. And then, you know, video. I had a keyboard, like a Yamaha keyboard, and a 2 CD sound effects set, and we would connect all the different, you know, just lots and lots of analog stuff that I would do to make audio and video projects. And so seeing these things, seeing all of this old school equipment in these shows just really brought me back to those Radio Shack days, buying the mixers and the adapters and everything. And so that was really, this was sort of like technology porn for me, seeing these.
You know, you saying all that kind of like reminds me that I always felt like there were 4 or 5 of the sliders with the slider things where you could, you know, pot sound up or down. There were 4 or 5 of them.
We call them faders in the biz.
We called them sliders, but whatever.
Sliders.
Yeah. But like, so we had like 4 or 5 of those on a board, and then there would be like 8 or 9 more of them. Like the board just always seemed to have it was meant to do way more than our little radio stations were ever able to do.
When you ever see like music being recorded, the producer always has like the Starship Enterprise of like 20,000 sliders and faders and buttons. And it's like, one guy rapping or singing or something. But yeah, there's lots of, we'll get into, I tried to take note of the different accoutrement we get in these different radio stations. But yeah, that was really fun to me. But yeah, no proper experience I ever had being a radio DJ. But let's get into it. What are our shows? What did we watch?
All right, we're watching Welcome Back, Kotter, Season 3, Episode 16, Sweatwork. Family Ties, Season 2, Episode 7, Sweet Lorraine. A Different World, Season 1, Episode 15, Dr. Cupid. And Boy Meets World, Season 2, Episode 17, On the Air.
Yeah, so we've talked about Welcome Back, Kotter a few times now. I've put out the theory, completely unsubstantiated, that this was the birth of like the rowdy crowd, you know, give everybody a swig of Jack Daniels before you start recording. Yep. Yeah, they're always hooting and hollering on this set. It just, it has that vibe that would kind of give way to Married with Children and stuff like that. This one has precious little Gabe Kotter and no John Travolta at all.
Yeah.
Barbarina completely AWOL.
Yeah, he was mentioned that he was the roving reporter that they sent out to Times Square to talk to women on the street. Yeah. And then we haven't seen him since Tuesday when he was sent out to do that.
No Barbarino, so I don't know if Travolta was already making movies and stuff.
Yeah, he was. I mean, this is Season 3. Yeah. So I think at this time he'd been in at least 2 of the big ones, right? Like I think Grease was already out by now.
Okay, well I was thinking more like The Boy in the Bubble or something. I feel like Grease and Saturday Night Fever were early, but I didn't know if they were.
Because I think
they overlapped with this.
By Season 4 he had been in all Saturday Night Fever, Grease, and everything.
Straight up movie star.
Yeah, and he was only in 2 episodes in Season 4.
Okay.
So at this point, like he's out promoting movies. He definitely. I mean, this is Season 3, but yeah, he had already been in a couple.
That is wild. That he was on this show saying "up your nose with a rubber hose" like 9 months prior, and these producers were like, that's the guy we need to play our hard-hitting, character in Saturday Night Fever. Anyway, we do get from Kotter at the beginning his requisite uncle joke, right?
Yes.
Every episode of Welcome Back, Kotter at least begins and ends
with
him
joke.
telling his wife a joke about his uncle. This one is going to be, my uncle is a sports mechanic. He fixes basketball games. Audience gives basically a standing ovation, rapturous applause.
Well, here's the thing, though. I always find these intros, and in this case, the outro, because he was talking to the vice principal in the outro and did a my uncle joke. I find these setups so laborious. For some reason, they don't talk even as quick as Jerry Seinfeld did in his little intros and outros when they would have the little interstitials of his stand-up sets. These are little setups that are right from this guy's, stand-up. And it is so slow. He's like, hey, hon, did I ever tell you about my uncle?
Yeah.
And the audience starts tittering, and she was like, oh boy, what now? And I'm not even exaggerating, like the slowness. It's almost like they're like, oh, we didn't write enough of an episode, so just talk slow.
I think it's like he's savoring, like they love these uncle jokes so much. These people in the audience are like, don't just blow through it. We really need to feel it.
My family's really, I come from a great family. They're in all the businesses.
Yeah.
I've got somebody in arts and sports and whatever. He's like, I've got one uncle who's a sports mechanic.
This is the comedy equivalent of chewing your food 7 times before you swallow it.
Right, exactly. And she repeats it, a sports mechanic?
Yeah. But yeah, it is because this little cold open, I mean, like they need it to be at least like 40 seconds long, not like 15 seconds long. But yeah, then when the proper episode starts, Mr. Kotter is going to tell Washington, one of our sweat hogs here, is going to be kind of our main character this time. He's going to say, yeah, the principal wants to see you. I don't know why. I've got to look after, he's got little twin babies, I need to help look after them or whatever. So he's going to be mostly absent. And we get the lowdown. The principal comes in, the vice principal, the little smarmy guy that's, he's the Dr. Samuels of this show.
Yes, and he kind of looks like Dr. Samuels too.
He's talking jive, like they used to say.
Oh, he sure is. It was very strange. And they set him up for that too, because he said, he was asking me for Afro Sheen earlier.
Mr. Kotter said he was acting really strange and ethnic. And I'm thinking, what is this going to mean? That he was acting ethnic. And then, this grumpy little, in case you haven't seen the show, this is like a little 65-year-old white man who comes barging into the classroom. And the first thing he says is, hey, blood. And he says like half a dozen other things. Skin, man, is one of the things.
Yeah, he's like, skin, man. And he gives him like a high or a low 5 or whatever. The whole thing. Yeah.
So he's talking like, some sort of the colloquialisms of the young urban gentleman of the 1970s.
He's talking like a black guy.
But the weird thing is, this kind of has nothing to do with anything. Why is he talking like this? What does this have to do with his scheme about the radio?
He's saying, oh, I'm hip. I know what the kids are like, and we're going to restart the radio station because there's a contest for ratings and we never win anything. And I know you. So back in like season 1, there was an episode where Washington had like a part-time job at a radio station.
All right.
So this is coming back to that.
I still don't understand why he needs to talk like Superfly in order to ask him to do this.
Who knows? But because they always ignore him anyway. I mean, they don't ever think he's up to any good. So you would think maybe he's just trying
just trying to butter him up, I guess. It's weird as hell.
Butter him up, or also maybe just act like, I know what's cool. I know what's hip and young.
Yeah, this whole thing is going to come out. We need to start a radio station and win the prize.
Because we've never had a trophy.
No, the closest thing we've ever got is, he says, we got a picture from Clean Skin Week. We got like the kid with acne got his picture taken or something. I did not really understand what this joke was, but they have some one-liner that establishes we've never won anything at all, no sports or anything. So we need to start a radio station so we can win. And so I just want to kind of mark this. We're going to have lots of interesting recurring subtropes, but there's definitely going to be different angles. All these shows are going to have different angles on
why they're restarting the radio station that's been defunct for so long.
Exactly, or that has never existed. And this is the only one that has this competitive thing. Where is this like?
It's about ratings.
Is this like the dean in like what show am I thinking of where there's like a principal or somebody that has that? Oh, we need to always beat that other
Glee.
That rival is okay.
When we got to get to regionals or whatever. But so this is, and I, am ashamed to say as a former news, journalist that I don't think I've ever seen Network. This is a parody of the movie Network.
It's a parody of a handful of things, I feel like. We're definitely going to be mixing our metaphors here. But yeah, he's going to ask Washington to sort of spearhead a student radio station because, like you said, he has experience with it, and I guess he thinks Washington's a cool guy. We should say, if you don't know, Welcome Back, Kotter is about the Sweat Hogs, the four main gang of the class, which is Washington, Epstein, Barbarino, and Horseshack.
Right.
And so...
who are... range in age from 25 to 29.
Like
right. Horseshack is the oldest. He's I think he's 29 this season. He basically turns 30 right after season 4 ends or during season 4.
And he really looks it. Yeah. Horseshack is...
Well, they do talk about, though, how they got held back multiple times.
Yes, that's true.
So, I mean, they sort of bring it into the story.
And people, frankly, just looked different in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Like, people aged differently. But yeah, Horseshack is going to become a major part of this story. He's going to sort of fill the AC Slater role from last time of being the guy that's not good at being a radio personality.
Right.
But while he was standing there, I was noticing a few things. First of all, a lot to say about the fashion in this lineup in general, but especially Welcome Back, Kotter.
Can we look, we've talked about the fashion in Welcome Back, Kotter before, but I don't think I have noticed as much as I noticed this time the dick outlines. Like how tight the jeans are that the guys literally had to shift their peens to a part of their pants so they would be a little bit less noticeable. There is a lot of dick outline in this episode.
I did not notice that. I noticed that right from the get-go, Washington's outfits, I was digging everything. He's wearing these sweaters and stuff and just really, really like it. And then when Horseshack shows up, he's the quote-unquote nerdy guy in the sense that he's weird and he talks with the
he's like their Screech
voice. Right. But he's not a nerd in the... I don't think he does particularly well in school. He's not that kind of nerd.
Sure.
And the way that he dresses, this may be the single most... The character I want to model myself...
You like that really long scarf that is down to his knees?
He has this olive sort of work jacket, almost like something Fidel Castro would wear. And then this really, really long striped scarf that's wrapped around his neck and comes down almost to his feet on both sides. He's often wearing a little cap. And I'm looking at him going I love this guy's whole deal. I love the way he's dressed. I'm also noticing that he's a pretty good-looking guy, but he is a middle-aged man.
He's in his 20s,
but yeah. But he kind of looks almost like Mark Van whatever from Perfect Strangers, Mark Lynn Baker. He's got that kind of
he kind of does.
He's got the goofy afro, Jufro, if I could be so bold.
Yeah.
But he's actually got a kind of handsome face.
Well, and that's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if they were around the same age. If not Balky, the other one from Perfect Strangers, if he was around 30 when they filmed that show.
Yeah. Why did we never get the show with them as brothers? Ron Palillo and Mark Lynn Baker as the Fabulous Baker Boys. I don't know. So, okay, let's start tracking it now. This is our first student radio station, not including Saved by the Bell. Again, the old-timey equipment. We have the big reels and stuff. We've got things that, to me, I said this joke last time on Saved by the Bell. It looks like Frankenstein's laboratory. Like you have all these little like meters and stuff, like things that look like they should be measuring weather or something. Like it's so
They're
much.
measuring the frequencies.
Yeah, like it's just so much stuff, you know, like up on the walls and shelves and everything that, you know.
Well, and what's fun about all of these is that they're cramped, right? Because they're at they're in a school.
Yeah.
So none of these are at, you know, like Bayside had the whole half of the basement. It wasn't even, I mean, it was a little bit cramped, but it wasn't that cramped. Or like, you know, what's that movie with Christian Slater? Pump Up the Volume.
Our last episode is going to be basically a remake of that, The Boy Meets World.
And so we're like, Pump Up the Volume, he's in his whole basement. Christian Slater's like, he's got all of this space, you know. These kids are all like crammed into a tiny little booth, and that's also where all the equipment is. It's not like, you know, when I was in college, we had the booth, like the DJ booth, but then we also had the production booth next door that was like throwing back and forth to the, you know, to the national networks and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's all crammed in one little space. They're coming in and out. They're having conversations when the mic is clearly live. Like,
yeah. Well, let's also check this trope. I don't know if I noticed it as much in this one, but characters speaking in a completely other direction than where the microphone is in all of these things.
Because that's what the camera is.
Or just in general, just like, oh yeah, this is good radio, right? Everybody could hear me fine. And like not making any...
I'm putting the arm on the record player.
But so we get lots of that. We get a little taste of Washington's DJ persona. We have Epstein doing...
the Consumer Reports.
Okay, so and then we find out...
Epstein's whole thing cracks me up.
He's very funny.
Right? Like the first one he's talking about is like, oh, if, you know, I'm here to save you money. That's what I'm here for. And I can't remember the first one. The second one, he was like, used socks. If you need to save money, you can go get socks from any open dryer at the laundromat.
Yeah, and he's the one that says Barbarino is conducting the woman on the street interviews, I think. And
no,
Washington.
No, Horshack says that because it's part of his news.
Right. So that's what's going on with Barbarino. He's doing woman on the street interviews, but then he got carried away, and so he's off shacking up with some woman, explaining Travolta's absence. And then we get Horshack and his whole thing. What exactly does he do on the radio?
He's the news. He's supposed to come in and read the news, but he is always like, well, today I got good news and I got bad news. And he doesn't, he's like, the good news is there's no bad news. The bad news is I don't have any other news.
Yeah. So again, like basically the same story as Saved by the Bell last week, where one of them sucks and doesn't realize it. And they get the sort of orders that they have to let him go. In this case, it's the vice principal, you know, again, he's just obsessed with the ratings.
Right.
It's
he keeps coming in with these green cards.
Yeah.
Being like, the ratings on that time slot are down.
Yeah, they're competing with Jefferson High School.
Right.
That's like their rival. Yeah, I don't know how he's like tracking these analytics.
The school board's doing it because they're going to give away the prize. Come on, Jay, don't question too much.
So he tells Washington, he's like, Horshack, he says, your ratings are fine until Horshack gets on, and then they plummet. So Horshack is like tanking everything. You got to let him go.
Yeah.
Right. And so Washington has to sit down and have this talk with Horshack. And he says a line that I didn't understand this reference. When he breaks the news, you've been canceled. They don't like you. We're ending your show. Horshack says, I feel like Betty White.
So I believe because of low ratings, right? So Betty White, I think, had her own sitcom, right? She had her own show, not her own sitcom. She had her own show, like the Betty White Show.
Like a variety show.
Right. She had a show. I think it was called the Betty White Show, and it got canceled for low ratings.
Yeah. I guess that's what I assumed it was, but it was just so funny hearing that now and being like, we do not associate Betty White with like bad ratings and failure
exactly.
and cancellation. Like maybe he's presaging the Golden Palace only getting one season. I don't know. But yeah, Horshack is devastated and he's like, all right, Mr. Washington, he's like, let me just get on one last time, right? He wants to give a farewell address.
So I can say farewell.
Yes. And so this is where we get the network parody. This is where we need to explain, I think, to anybody under the age of like 48, which basically includes us. Like I've seen Network at some point or another. This is a Sidney Lumet movie from the 70s. And this was, for a while, like this was up there with Give Him an Offer He Can't Refuse. Like this was one of the most quoted and parodied lines, was the guy sticking his head out the window and saying, I'm mad as hell
and I'm not going to take it anymore. Yeah.
That movie is about like a news guy that loses his mind, and they either fire him or try to censor him or whatever.
But I thought it was about, he was like getting let go because of ratings too, wasn't he?
I can't, like, I saw it one time like ages ago, but regardless, it's We're
doing a great job explaining it to all those folks out there. It's a straight
line to, Horshack sticking his head out the window. Well, I mean, I guess what he does in general is he starts pontificating. He starts getting riled up.
Yeah.
And, he's going on about how we've got a win at any cost attitude around here. And my getting letting go from the radio station is just the latest example of all this.
Right.
And so his version, he says he wants people to yell, I'm fed up, Arnold, and I don't care who knows it.
That's right.
And when he goes over to the window and yells that, and then we hear these off-camera people yell it back, we see Washington and Epstein do like a Scooby-Doo-esque double take to each other.
It was very animated.
Yeah.
And I mean, it looked like an animated show. Yeah. Not like, it looked like they were pretending to be cartoon characters.
They do like a circular head
thing.
Yeah.
And then looked at each other. And Epstein did this like blue steel lip purse at the end of it too. Yes. He was staring right at Washington with his lips pursed, just like,
Very silly. And so, of course, the vice principal comes in. He's like, hold everything. The ratings are in. Everybody loves this, off his rocker, all angry, fired up Horshack.
So we got to keep him.
Yeah. So this is where I'm talking about like mixing your metaphors and the sort of parody being all over the place. Horshack then becomes like this Dalai Lama-esque guru, right? Like,
well, so he gets sort of famous, and so his response, being Horshack, to all of his popularity is to put on these robes and start walking around barefoot like all of these famous people did in the 70s. Think about John Lennon, right?
Yeah. He's got that kind of, that messianic and very sort of like the hippy dippy has given way to the Asian influence, whatever you want to say. To me, I think
he looked like he was leading a cult. That's what he was doing.
Exactly. And he's got that vibe. And this was another reference that I didn't understand the specifics of it. When he starts going, Johnny cannot read. Why cannot Johnny read? Because the schools are failing him. I feel like this must have been referring to some specific speech or some personality, from the 70s. But he's given this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's another thing that's from Network. Maybe it was one of the things that, is it William Holden in that is the one that kind of loses his mind?
Whatever this was, he's got, he's now broadcasting his radio show from a classroom, right? He's got like a live audience where he's walking around with a mic.
It's all in the same space, but like he's dragged the microphone out of the recording booth.
Exactly.
And
he's standing, built off
he's standing in this space where they've brought desks in. It used to have a couch. It used to be like the lobby.
All right, I see.
Of the little recording booth. But now, because it's like in an office, and that's like the outer office and the inner office, right?
Or a classroom, essentially. It's a room in the school.
Right, but so they brought in desks, and he's got all of his acolytes, there chanting with him, and he's talking to them in their, to their faces, and he's going on about the pay raises for the vice principals, and he's like, if they were nice principals, they wouldn't be called called vice principals. And so then you see, what's his name? Woodson or whatever the vice principal's name is, getting, angry, Woodman, getting angrier and angrier and looking like he's going to stop him because he's like, but it's the ratings are keeping him from stopping Horshack. So he just says, it was a long overdue raise, he yells from the background.
Yeah, so exactly. Now Horshack is starting to like espouse these kind of random like local political beliefs because he's like running his mouth about everything.
Right.
He's got this cult guru-esque following. So now we cut back to the Kotter household. We get a little bit more of Kotter, of Gabe and his wife, and Epstein and Washington are there. This is another one of these shows, kind of like Saved by the Bell, where your teacher, your students, everybody's just has that relationship where you stop by their house and hang out with
there was an episode earlier this season where they tried to get them a new apartment because they had twin daughters, and then it all fell apart. They ended up moving back to their old apartment. But they're all way involved in each other's life.
This is how these shows work.
But
just continuing the fashion talk for a second. First of all, love the days of someone like Gabe Kotter sitting around his own house in a vest and tie.
Oh, but this is how you knew he was, it was casual. He had all of the buttons except the bottom one undone.
Yeah, and no coat.
Until he starts giving his speech.
Yeah. So he's sitting around with Epstein and Washington, and they're all lamenting, like, what do we do about Horshack? We gotta shut him down. He's a loose cannon. Kotter explained, after the vice principal raise thing, he came out against raises for teachers. And so, he's got to be stopped. And so then Horshack stops by, right? And Kotter's like, all right, let me handle this. I'm going to give him like a Kotter talk.
Yeah, everybody go hang out in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I promise I won't tell one of my stories.
And this is when Kotter, we have to remember this is, I guess maybe not the first, but this is like the sort of the 70s cycle of comedians having a show built around their persona, their crazy antics. So Gabe Kotter gets to do his take on a sort of like crazy Baptist minister kind of persona. That's how I saw it.
Okay, say more. What do you mean?
Well, he starts like, I don't know, he just gets all like riled up and he starts doing that thing of like, and I can feel it throughout my bones, right? Doesn't he kind of get that sort of like that crazy minister, like religious zealot?
Did I fall asleep during this part?
Or did I imagine it? I don't know.
I remember him talking to Horshack about getting...
It's before he gives him like the serious talking to. It's just a bit. It's just like an excuse for
just doing a bit.
Gabe Kotter to do like a funny voice. That's when he puts on his jacket, his like proper suit jacket. So he's in his full suit. And yeah, he does this crazy Baptist minister thing. And then he gets serious. And yeah, I don't remember if that was to Epstein and Washington.
Yeah, because he doesn't put his jacket on until he's talking to Horshack.
He does, yeah. Well,
because I was watching the whole vest situation unfold because I couldn't figure out why he only had the bottom button of a 5 or 6 button vest buttoned. I was like, what is happening here? This is a very strange way to dress.
Whatever the case may be, he eventually tells Horshack, like, look, you came out against teachers' raises. Like, are you aware that teachers are among the lowest paid professionals in the world? And, he basically says, like just consider what you're saying. And,
well,
like, the impact.
He tells him that he can't just go espousing stuff, whatever he wants to say without knowing anything.
Yeah, well, and also he says pizzazz is fine, but it needs to be based on truth.
Right.
He's saying there's no there, basically. He's saying you're doing all these crazy like antics and
trying
this
to get
whole personality.
well, exactly. It's like the 70s version of a content creator. He's doing things that are over the top and a little bit extreme and saying things that are over the top and extreme because, he wants to rile people up and get him to listen. It's like any of the, that's what Fox News makes their money
all
on.
Rhetoric and
those,
no substance.
and those like court TV people. Who is that? Nancy Grace? They just like, they say really the hyperbole of what they're saying. Like, it might start from a kernel of truth, but they're saying it to this nth degree, to the point where it's like, we can't even talk about anything anymore. Yeah, and you're not saying anything.
In the case of Horshack, yeah, exactly. It doesn't start from anything. Like, he's just running his mouth about whatever pops into his mind.
Exactly.
And it's all just about the kind of like showmanship of it all. So he sees reason, and the episode kind of ends with a whimper. We get a voiceover, like making it kind of seem like a sort of documentary thing of Gabe Kotter saying like, well, Horshack took to the airwaves and was a much more level-headed voice, and therefore his ratings dropped and people didn't like him anymore. And we get the vice principal going, we lost out to Jefferson High School and their armadillo report or something. Right. So it's just like the whole thing is a wash.
One of the girls who was sitting there chanting and going along with Horshack earlier, she, during one of his last broadcasts, comes up and is like, repeats his little phrase back to him that, I'm not dealing with you anymore. Like, I'm fed up and whatever he said. And she goes, well, she was the president of my fan club.
Yeah, we've got the usual sitcom thing of the extremely fickle sort of mob mentality of the student body where they just flip-flop instantaneously. But yeah, I feel like this one, we're carrying over some of the tropes from Saved by the Bell of that fun thing of like, well, it's a radio station, so you're going to need all these different little niches,
everybody's going to get involved. Somebody's going to do a radio segment, like a music segment. Somebody's going to do a consumer segment.
Exactly. And like I said, we carry over that trope of one of them is no good and doesn't have a good radio persona. Right. We need to break it to him. But yeah, unlike Saved by the Bell, where we were ultimately harnessing the power of the radio to save the Max, this was to win the contest, and they didn't win.
Then they didn't win.
So let's move on to Family Ties.
Season 2, Episode 7, Sweet Lorraine.
Yeah, so this is going to come at things from a completely different angle. This is a whopper of an episode.
Oh, yes.
Like we got lots to talk about. But yeah, this is one of the ones that is not going to be, let's start a radio station, or we discovered in the cobwebs all this old radio equipment. In this one, we kind of start in media res, if you will. Everything is all up and running. And it seems like Alex is the established DJ. What is his role in this thing?
He has a radio show on the school radio station where he plays swing music.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Now, I guess I'm going to ask with all of these, because this one really gets me thinking, like, are they... Like I said at the beginning, are they broadcasting these on the radio? Are they playing them? I guess in this one, it has to be.
Yes. So this one even has a handy dandy little sign in the background to tell you where they are broadcasting. So this is WHSH. Okay. Right? Because they're, Henderson High School or something like that. They broadcast to Henderson High School and the local surrounding area. That's what it says. Or so like, and a small part of Ohio or something, I think is what it says on the sign. But yeah, so they're going out over the airwaves, not just to students, which is how we get this woman calling in.
Yes, he calls in. We should say, just to give you the look of this thing, I feel like this one is a little bit less busy with equipment.
Yes, but this one looks more like a school radio station.
Yeah, it's more like, they all have some stuff on shelves and everything.
Yeah, this is just like, we've got the bare minimum in the AV closet.
Yeah, and this one is all about the phones. This one has the phones on the table and the 7 little lights that light up, because it's all about him taking requests. Yes. And he can get phone calls from any outside line, and anyone of any age can call in and request music.
Yes,
from
and
this
talk
high
to a teenager.
Yeah, this is where I wrote down the thing about not speaking into the mic. Alex especially just talks. He aims his whole body wherever he feels like. He doesn't seem to be wearing his headphones when he's responding to the callers. Yeah, none of it makes any sense. Mallory stops by and she's kind of, ragging on him or whatever, oh, nobody listens to all this. But let's just get to it. He gets a call from a woman, a young woman, he presumes, requesting the song Sweet Lorraine.
Yes.
She's got a sexy French voice. And he says, I like the sound of, I like how you sound. What do you say, sight and scene, you and I get together?
Well, wait, though, because he isn't the one with that idea.
Oh, okay.
Right? He puts on her song and then doesn't hang up the phone, and all of a sudden this voice comes back out that's not over the air, just in the office to him, saying, I'm also an Alex fan as well. And he's like, oh, well, in that case, do you want to go out?
Yes. So
weekend?
This woman with the French voice, French accent, so he makes plans.
And she has
with her.
a husky voice.
Yeah. And just this whole thing is such a blast from the past. This whole concept of like, oh, what could go wrong? Let me just make a date with this. Oh, she sounds great. Let me get all dolled up. And Alex has a date with this mystery woman.
He shows up at her house to pick her up, and a woman answers the door, and he says, hey, I'm here to take out your daughter. And she was like, oh. And then her 11-year-old daughter walks into the room, and she's like, this is Michelle. I'm Lorraine. Yeah. And he's like, oh. And she's like, are you surprised? And he's like, no, I'm not surprised. No, I was totally expecting you to be a 40-year-old woman.
Yes. She keeps asking if he's surprised. He keeps saying no. There's a funny line where she says something about like destiny. Have you ever felt the pull of destiny or something? And he says, well, destiny and I are certainly not strangers. It's that great thing of Michael J. Fox being all overwhelmed and, a little bit intimidated and trying to act like he's still in control. He's doing a great job. But the whole rest of this episode, this is going to be the one I think we'll agree where the radio station is the least central in the story. The radio station is the catalyst, and it will return, but this is primarily going to be about Alex dating, quote unquote, or being friends with this older woman, and this story is weird as hell from the jump.
Oh, it's so weird.
It is just this series again and again and again of these back and forths of this woman going like,
are you uncomfortable?
Yeah, or going like, there's absolutely nothing strange about this. I think you're a nice young man. Let's have a conversation and just be friends. And okay, that's great. So what time do I pick you up for our date? Like the way
and then they're like holding hands and they're dancing and they're doing all of these romantic things, but her line in the sand is, we're not going to be sexual together. It's very Harold and Maude.
Definitely Harold and Maude, but Harold and Maude is much, much better sketched out than this. But much like Harold and Maude, we're supposed to understand like they just have this connection. Like they're just, because she's so mature, I don't really understand what she sees in Alex.
Yeah.
But,
well, she kind of indicates that she's had sort of a hard row of it, like a hard go of it with an awful divorce and a bad marriage before that. And so she works in finance, so he is like super interested in that part of her life. But she's also, a world traveler and, lived all over the world, very cultured. And so she is enjoying, I think, being in a relationship where she can share all of these things that she's excited about with someone. And he is like a puppy dog because he doesn't know who he is yet. So he is excited to learn about all these things. But what's the reason that it strikes you as weird is because of the power dynamic. Like, of course, I don't care how much trauma you're going through. Like, it's nice to spend time with somebody who likes to learn from you and likes to do all the things you're doing. But they aren't becoming an actual human. They're just like being with you because they want to be with you. You're not realizing. The good thing about it is that by the end, she does realize like the sway she's having over him and that he's not actually living a 17-year-old's life.
It's so funny when she explains her point of view later to the parents. And it's all all just like her justification is all just like her enjoyment. Like, I really like this.
This is
I
fun.
find this invigorating hanging
Right.
out with a teenager. Don't you understand?
He's great. Your son's great. You should be so proud of him. I think the acting masterclass in this episode, though, hands down, has to go to Steve and Elise because they are hilarious. There is this scene where it's just a 2-shot of them sitting at the far side of their kitchen table. You know, normally we get the shot of them at the kitchen table where there's somebody sitting kind of with their back catty corner to the door and you get to see the whole kitchen. No. They're both sitting on the one side of the table against the wall, eating Haagen-Dazs ice cream out of the pint, just like, you know, staring catatonically off into space, trying to talk through it. But every time they realize the next realization, they just like shove ice cream in their mouth.
They have their own his and hers Haagen-Dazs tons.
It's so good.
Let's just walk through really quickly, like the steps of this relationship, right? Alex and this older woman, Lorraine, they go on a date. They're talking about movies, right? She wants to always take him to Swedish movies. This is always a thing in the 80s. Woody Allen would take Annie Hall to Swedish movies or foreign movies in general. That's like your pretentious types will take you to foreign movies.
We watch old episodes of Siskel and Ebert, and they make sure at least like one every 3 episodes to just throw in some foreign film and be like, you can't see it here, but if you could, you should. It's so good.
But here's the thing. This is a surprise to me. Alex's favorite movie, or at least his go-to example of a good movie, is Conan the Barbarian.
And he says Conan in this way that I'm like, why are you saying Conan the Barbarian?
It's not Conan like the talk show host. It's
what do you
Conan.
mean it's not Conan the Barbarian?
It's funny. It used to be that people would snicker when people would pronounce the talk show host like Conan because everyone was used to Conan the Barbarian. Now you're used to Conan O'Brien.
So you think that I'm just... But so people said that Conan the Barbarian?
Conan is usually how you say the warrior, and Conan is the Irish talk show host.
Wasn't it Arnold Schwarzenegger who played
Conan? Yeah,
Conan the Barbarian
is Arnold. But yeah, I guess...
Is it supposed to rhyme with Conan the Barbarian? Is it meant to rhyme?
This is tying in with Alex's sort of retrograde sexual politics, I guess, that he would be into that kind of movie, or just that he's immature.
Right, he is. These are the kinds of things that he's interested in seeing. He's like, why does everything have to be so symbolic?
But yeah, so they do that, and then they go on a skating date, right? And all the while, we just...
And he's like, I've never been ice skating before, but you live in Ohio.
That is weird, but we just can't overemphasize the extent to which it keeps going back and forth between, like, both in terms of the verbal language and the physical language of, like, we're just friends. This is platonic, except we're holding hands, and I'm calling her my girlfriend, and I'm calling it a date, but it's not, but we're just friends. Like, it is so weird and ambiguous. And so they eventually end up back at the Keaton household.
Like what happens when adults groom children.
Yeah. So they're back at the household, right? And I guess we're to understand, like, oh, the parents are out. They've got the house to themselves. And so Alex and his friend, quote unquote, Lorraine, the 39-year-old woman, they keep emphasizing she's turning 40 soon, but she's not 40 yet. They says,
move the coffee table out of the way so they can dance. And she's like, I thought you would never ask.
Yeah, and I feel like this is something I've seen in movies and TV. So maybe it's a real thing. Like, dancing in your living room, just like one-on-one. I don't like to dance.
Yeah, it is a real thing, Jay. You know how sometimes I grab you in our living room and I'm like, dance with me? And you're like, please stop. I need to go into the kitchen. I got IBS. I can't handle it. Yeah, it's a real thing and it's romantic. So on you.
Well, that's what they're doing. Yeah, the two of them are dancing, like old-timey dancing, where like you're holding both hands.
You turn into Tina when I mention dancing. From Bob's Burgers.
That thing where, like, you're like holding both hands and going like far apart and then close together. Like something that they'd be doing in like a Daffy Duck cartoon or something.
Yeah, they are dancing in a really weird way.
And the parents walk in, and this is where we get
like, Alex, how was your day?
They are mouth agape. They don't know what to say. And it's great when they're struggling, and eventually...
Oh, yes. Stephen, in this, he's like, So you're his, who are you?
Yeah. And then eventually Steven goes, good night. And Elise goes, yeah, that's good. Good night. And it's like, perfect. And and so they take it up with Alex later. Like, what is the deal? What is going on with this woman? And again, it's just so weird. Like, Alex is like, there's nothing going on between us. She's just my girlfriend.
Right.
Makes no sense. They use the word date. They use the word
Well, and that's
friends.
what's so interesting, right? Because they had the ice skating date just before he has this conversation with his parents. And when they got back to her house after the ice skating date, his foot like cramps up, and then she rubs his foot, and it
foot
looks
rub
like
can only lead to one thing.
Well, and the way she grabs his foot, number one, it's very mothering. Like, she's like, oh, honey, let me warm it up for you. She doesn't say honey, but she's like, let me warm that up for you. And then the way she like puts his foot between her legs and starts rubbing it it's very sexual.
Yeah.
And he like is kind of coming up behind her, like hovering, and then she turns around and they almost kiss, and she's like, no, this can't be a part of our relationship. We need to be friends.
She says, let's not complicate this.
Yes.
Like, this is the most weird, complicated situation anyone has ever been in. Like, that is just, that's like...
Let's just be friends.
Yeah, like that's
that
like
has
Tom
all
Hanks
this,
in
like,
Apollo 13
tension.
going like, let's not go to outer space.
Well, and he goes, well, so how long until you think we can complicate things, because teenage boy.
So he's establishing like, yeah, he's horny for her, and she's like, no, that would be irresponsible if we did that.
We can't go too far. So then he comes home and they have just had this conversation.
Yes,
so now he's like espousing all of this.
He goes, but Mom and Dad, skating, Chinese food, sparkling conversation, right?
Yes.
These are the things he gets from this.
And Steve and Elise are like, oh my God, they had Chinese food together. Yeah. Do you remember? We were married 2 years before we had Chinese food together.
Well, just be glad they didn't have Malaysian food. Moroccan food. You remember what happens when we had that.
And then they both like get red and like, because there can't be an episode of Family Ties if there isn't some like sexual flirtation between the parents.
No, we've established we love their relationship. They're a great sitcom couple. And they're, as usual, they're on the same page here. Alex says there is nothing lurid about this relationship, right? It's just so weird. So he says, all right, what we're going to do is invite her over for dinner, and you can all get to know each other, and that'll be fine.
Yes.
Then everything will be okay. So they do that. She comes over, and as soon as Alex like excuses himself to get drinks or whatever, they're like, what the hell is your deal?
Yeah, basically. So she comes in and they, Alex greets her at the door. They immediately sit down on the couch. They're sitting basically on top of each other and holding hands on the couch.
Holding hands, yes.
Yeah. And not like like interlocking holding hands, not like the sort of little kid kind of, let's hold hands, without interlocking fingers.
They look like a couple.
They do look like a couple. And so he goes to get her an aperitif, and then and she's like, oh, how thoughtful of you. And and so then Stephen and Elise are like, hey, what's going on here? And she, like you said, is like, I just really enjoy being with him. You must understand that, da, 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 da. And then Elise is like, yes, but as a mother, you must understand how this is very uncomfortable. Like, I'm worried about him. He's not hanging out with his friends anymore. He's letting his schoolwork slide, and a couple other things about like
and she's like, but I have fun hanging out with him.
Right, exactly. And then she was like, but I see what you're saying, and if you don't support the relationship, then I will not be friends with him anymore. Yeah. And then she leaves.
Yeah. So, it's one of these, Alex comes back in, hey, who's ready to party? Right. And nobody's there.
And, his parents are, and he's like, what the hell did you do? And they were like, well, we had a little conversation. I think we might have hurt her feelings, and then she left. And I'm like, I don't know that you hurt her feelings. Like, it was weird that they weren't able. It was the moment in this show where they did the sitcom thing of like not being able to communicate. Like, they were still feeling so awkward about the whole thing. They just sort of weren't able to tell Alex what had gone down. And so she's already gone. He goes running out the door after her, trying to find her, and it couldn't. And then the last scene that we get is him days later at the radio station playing Sweet Lorraine from all these, because it's one of these standards that many people covered. So he's playing all the different versions.
It's an all Sweet Lorraine day.
Yeah.
I also just want to say it's funny how this is a year or two before Michael J. Fox would star in Back to the Future, movie where his best friend is a 60-year-old man.
Well, and his mother is named Lorraine.
Yeah, well, that's true. But it's just funny to me how this was the time where it's not like we didn't know about child molestation or anything, but
no, it was definitely happening a lot.
It wasn't like, by the time we were teenagers, there was a thing of like an adult being in the same room with a child. You would get some snickering joke about that, you know, about like, I always joke about how we would get into the hot tub with my Boy Scout leader, Mr. Schnell. And in the 80s, it wasn't like an instant punchline, or like your mind didn't immediately go
to child abuse,
foul play.
Yeah.
Every time there was like a parent and a child, or like an adult and a child in the same space. And you see that I think definitely in the Back to the Future thing, and in this too, where like we weren't quite at that same level of sensitivity where it's like, oh my God, this just goes without saying that this cannot happen at all. Like there's still this little weird sliver of acceptability to this woman being like, well, I can be friends with a young guy, right?
Yeah.
And, so yeah, she ultimately comes back to the radio station and just says like, look, your parents
are right.
Yeah, like, I'm basically grooming you. This is fucked up.
Yeah, like, you're right. We shouldn't be having this relationship. And he's like, well, don't I get a say? And she's like, you know, maybe in a few years, but no.
Yeah. So what I want to just kind of call out here is how what this has in common, I think, with our Different World episode and what the other ones don't really get into is how it's all about the radio being the medium that you can't see people. And so this whole sort of the blind date aspect of it, and, you know, Different World is going to be a overlapping trope with a Valentine's Day episode.
Yeah.
This idea of like the radio can also be the source of romantic intrigue because you can sort of fall in love with a voice or a personality without seeing them.
Someone who the way they talk and the way like the music that they're into really makes it seem like you guys would get along.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like, again, this one had the least to do with the radio station per se. Pretty crazy episode for all the reasons that we have just enumerated. But yeah, let's continue this theme with A Different World.
Season 1, episode 15, Dr. Cupid.
Yeah, so now we're firmly into the world of sort of radio as matchmaker, or at least as like potential matchmaker. This one's going to be different, right? Because we only have one character who is a radio personality here.
Right.
We don't really get a sense of like what the larger situation is.
And we're in college.
Yes, this is a college radio station. We don't have a larger sense of like what the college radio station is. What we know is that Dwayne Wayne, played by Kadeem Hardison, is Dr. Cupid. He is the Surgeon General of the airwaves, as his friend Ron
He's
puts
Dr.
it.
Cupid, and he also is what's the name of his made up person that is him?
Daniel Walker, I think.
Yeah.
It's a DW.
It's a DW, exactly.
So should we take it that his deal is a little bit like Kelly Lust from Saved by the Bell, which you so helpfully explained to me was not erotica, but sort of vague love advice and just general sort of like DJing with a sort of like romantic theme, basically.
Yeah, exactly. He's taking calls and like, you know, he's taking Lonely Hearts letters and trying to like answer questions, but the Lonely Hearts letters are his.
Yes,
he's writing himself or writing about himself as this other person.
He has papers that are printed out from a dot matrix printer with the little circle perforations on the side. Love those. I'll say this one in general had a lot of great old-timey tech. It had the big reel-to-reels on the walls, and it had lots of shelves in the background of cassettes. Just lots and lots of cassettes.
Well, because now we've moved away from, we have to play records at the radio station. Now we can play, we have, the technology has advanced. Yeah. We can play cassettes.
Yeah, they had some records too, but nice big wood shelves full of cassettes. But he has these letters on his dot matrix printouts, and he introduces this character to the world. He says, he reads this letter from Daryl. It's Daryl Walker.
Yes.
And he says what are his like qualifications?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something about being sensitive, something about like something else, sensitive, like walks on the beach or whatever. But the key is that he got a perfect score on his math SAT, and that's how everyone who knows that it's actually him, because Dwayne Wayne, that's his thing. Like, he's a math guy. He got a perfect score on his math SAT. And in the later seasons of that we've watched, like in that when Criss Cross guest starred during the 90s hip hop guest stars episode that we did, he is a professor of mathematics. That's what he does.
That's funny though, because all the other things that he says are lies. Like, he says, I can make Chinese food and all these other things,
sushi,
ballroom dancing or whatever. And when his friend Ron goes like, but you can't do any of these things, he's like, I'm not going to have to, baby. And so it's weird that he threw in that one, that one detail that's true. But let's get to it. Dwayne and Whitley both have these like lackeys. They both have these friends that are like these low status nerdy characters with glasses that are just like willing to do their bidding. So when Dwayne is in
Ron,
when Dwayne is in his DJ booth and his friend Ron comes in, and Ron is like, oh, but how are you going to do this? Aren't they going to know it's you? Dwayne reads, when he's reading this letter, he says, meet me in the library. All you ladies go to the library to meet Daniel Walker. And so when Daryl Walker. And so when Ron is like, well, what are you going to do when they just go to the library and see that it's you? Dwayne is like, well, they're not, because you're going to go to the library for me, and you're going to check them out, and just like Ron is delighted at this plan. Like, there's not any whiff of
he's like, oh, so I get to like scope out all the honeys at the library and decide which one's right for you and keep the rest for myself?
I mean, I guess maybe that's his angle, but that isn't said. To me, it just came across as like, he just loves Dwayne's hijinks so much. He loves his ideas that when Dwayne goes like, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go to the library. It just cracks me up how Ron is like, oh, this is great. Like, there's no sense of like, wait, why do I have to go?
Right.
Why do I have to do
why
this
are you involving me in your schemes?
What's in it for me? But so that's Dwayne's whole thing. He says, ladies, go to the library to meet Daniel Walker.
Daryl.
I'm just going to say he's Daniel. And then we cut to the cafeteria where we have all the girl characters, right? We have Denise, we have Marissa Tomei's character, and we have the other
Jaleesa,
okay. And so they're all together, and they've already figured out, in the words of our friend from Blackish, this is a plan that comes pre-failed. What is pre-ruined?
Pre-ruined.
They all know it's Dwayne already, and they're just laughing at him, and just no one's falling for it.
Right. Of our like three, kind of main characters that are all friends, and I think they might share a room, but I'm not sure.
But then Whitley comes in, and she's like, what's the deal with this Daryl Walker?
Yeah.
And they start pulling her leg.
They totally mess with her. So we're still in season 1 of this show. And this is, we still have Denise Huxtable, Lisa Bonet is still on the show, and Marissa Tomei. They were both only in season 1. In later seasons, Lisa Bonet came back as like a guest star. But, she left after season 1 because Bill Cosby said she was pregnant in real life. life with Zoe Kravitz, her daughter. And she, Bill Cosby was like, you can be Denise Huxtable or you can be pregnant.
Yeah,
but you can't be both.
Two things. First of all, I happened to watch this episode twice because of the way we recorded this. Now, we talked about how when Scott Baio directs episodes of Charles in Charge, he bills himself as Scott Vincent Baio. It's pretentious as hell. We love him for it.
Well, you love him for it.
Bill Cosby bills himself as the creator of this show, because of course it's a spinoff of The Cosby Show, as William Cosby Jr., educational doctor. Like it just... I just find that so obnoxious and stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was unsurprised when I saw that, executive produced by that, because that's like how, when back in the day before he was canceled, that's it was, Bill Cosby in the but that's just who he was. He was always, the Ed D was like a big part of who he was.
If your name takes 2 full lines to print out and it's not because your name is like Nagarani Ramasubramaniam, then there's a problem. So that was obnoxious as hell. But getting back to Denise, to Lisa Bonet. Yeah. I said this the last time we talked about this show. I'll say it again. She does not have the Riz to me.
Yeah,
Kadeem
he does. And so
He's
does
fun
Whitley.
to watch. And Whitley does too.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, she's sort of made to be the butt of the joke. She's the lame one. She's got her own fun Southern flavor of that.
Right.
But, even though they're doing a good job of this one in particular isn't even mainly about Denise. She's still sort of our anchor, and her total lack of fun.
She's so laid back.
I mean, I feel like I'm repeating exactly what I said last time. It's like she's on sedatives. Like she just has this, just this totally checked out, sleepy style that I think in real life I would probably respond to. I'd be like, yes, this is like a chill kind of person that I'd like to hang out with.
That I want to hang out with.
But she's not fun, and she just, you feel the energy dripping out of the TV whenever she's on.
No, absolutely. And I think the scene where, or the scenes where it's most apparent, it's when she is speaking one-on-one with Dwayne Wayne, right? Because his whole thing in season 1 is that he is obsessed with her and he wants to date her, and all of the, he's just hoping, and she knows it, and she, she's like, we're just going to be friends, but she is still she shows up at the pit, which is like their version of, the Max or whatever. She shows up at the pit with a red carnation, which is what you're supposed to wear if you're coming to meet Daryl Walker. Yeah. And she shows up with one, but she knows that it's him, and she walks over to him with it, and she's like, you're very funny. And he's like, oh yeah, all with all his energy. And she's like, as she's turning away from him, she's like, friends. And that's how we, the audience, are, and she says it just like that, friends. That's how we, the audience, are supposed to know. She's not showing up because she's romantically interested in him. She's showing up with this carnation because she knew nobody else was going to show up, and she didn't want him to be sad. And so they could hang out and have a date, but it's a friend date.
Yeah, there's this whole kind of back and forth. I noticed there's a shot in the intro sequence where Denise sees a hot guy walk by the phone booth and drops the phone and goes after him. So she's got a horny side to her.
Yeah, but it's not for Dwayne Wayne.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. The thing that's supposed to be anchoring this show is a little bit of sexual energy between the two of them.
They won't they?
And it doesn't happen. And he's given all that he can.
Yes.
And you're just getting nothing from her. It's very flat. Where you don't notice that flatness as much is when she's with her girlfriends, because they both have Marissa Tomei, obviously amazing, and the woman who plays Jaleesa, her name's Dawn Lewis. They both have enough energy in those scenes to bring it up. Anyway, so when Whitley comes in, we're jumping around all over in this episode, but we can go back to that, original scene where we started talking about it. Whitley comes in and they start, she asks about Daryl Walker, and the 3 girls all have figured out that it's Dwayne Wayne, and they're like, oh, you mean of the Washington, D.C. Oh, the Charleston Walkers. Yeah. And she's like, what? Because Whitley's whole thing is she's a debutante.
Yes.
And so she is like, he's also, from the upper crust and from Charleston in the South, just like me. Oh, and so then she goes to her lackey and makes a plan to go to the library to meet him, but she's not going to go.
No. Now, her lackey is Millie.
Yes.
Major Violet from Saved by the Bell energy here. Oh, yeah. Tori Spelling's character.
The big glasses and I hunched shoulders. I'm so insecure.
So nerdy, like that super extreme, Revenge of the Nerds kind of nerdiness. And so, it's a fun little old-timey, theatrical type setup where Whitley is sending her lackey to check out the goods. So is Dwayne Wayne. And so Ron and Millie, the two bespectacled, nerdy lackeys, have their own little meet cute in the library.
Yeah, and they actually are a really cute couple. They're both kind of into each other right from the start. And they decide, I don't even think they realize, or I don't think they even talk about how they're both there as the other one's sort of emissary. And, but they just, decide that they're going to go to the Valentine's Day party at the pit together. And so then when they go to report back to their, main character friends that they're reporting back to, they both are like, oh yeah, nobody ever showed up. Sorry, I got distracted. I got a date instead.
They notice part of their meet cute is he helps her clean her glasses.
Right. And then he tries them on. Yeah. And they're like, oh, we have similar prescriptions.
Yes. Have we ever tried that?
I think so, because I can't see through yours.
Okay.
I sort of vaguely remember that.
I don't really remember. But that's part of how they bond. And if we didn't already...
Do you want to do it live on the air right now and describe what we see?
It's
or what we don't see?
Anticlimactic.
Well, because you're nearsighted, right? I'm farsighted.
Well, so they're probably different.
Yeah.
If we haven't mentioned it already, this is a Valentine's Day episode.
Yeah.
And so everything, this whole Dwayne Wayne as Daniel Walker
Daryl
ruse.
You're making him white, Jay.
That is essentially an A story of like 4 or 5 different things going on. We have Millie and Ron on the side. We have a very small little thing where Marissa Tomei has something going on with the boyfriend that we don't even get to see. We have the resident director at their dorm has a whole thing with a South African dissident.
Okay, so I did not like this storyline. I did not like the way Denise was engaging in this storyline. Like, her whole thing is about being feminist, and yet she is like espousing all of these very traditional views to Letty, who is the resident, like the dorm mom.
Yeah, they call her resident director is what's on her door. I mean, we shouldn't get too bogged down in, but really, simply, this guy kind of comes calling. Letty doesn't want to answer the phone, doesn't want to talk to him.
Right. They broke up because he wanted her to give up her career and have kids and stay at home with kids.
Like I mentioned, he was a dissident. He was pублishing anti-apartheid newspapers,
and so was she.
Was jailed, and
and
this
so
whole
was
crazy
she.
backstory.
And then he was like, oh yeah, well now we're gonna get married and you're gonna stay home. And she's like, the hell I am. Yeah. I care about this stuff as much as you do.
But so that was all back in the past.
Right, but she shares it. Yeah, she tells this to the residents, to, Lisa Bonet and her friends and everybody. And then Denise, Lisa Bonet's character is like, oh, you got to give him another chance. He's such a nice guy. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what now?
I guess, that part, it didn't land on me as much as they were just kind of like, oh, come on, it's Valentine's Day. Just encouraging her. The point to me is that this guy shows up and he is the South African version of the Count from Sesame Street. He's so jolly. I mean, he walks in with this huge grin on his face, and everything he says is just followed by this He's just laughing. And so she's like, oh, Marcus, you haven't changed. Why won't you listen? And he's like, oh, come on, we shouldn't deny happiness or whatever. The whole point of this little subplot is that after 2 or 3 scenes of her being like, get lost, I don't want to talk to you or whatever.
I don't want that life. We have different opinions or different ideas about like what a marriage or a couple should be.
But then she finally says explicitly, and again, classic sitcom communication of waiting till the last minute to actually articulate. She says, I wasn't going to marry you then, and I'm not going to marry you now. And he's like, getting married? What are you talking about? I'm already married. I named my daughter after you because she's a firecracker like you are. I was just coming by to say hello.
Yeah,
like,
well,
the whole
except for he flirted with her for and was acting like he was wanting to get back together.
This guy is a whole crazy personality. Who knows what flirting even looks like for him? Like when she says, like, screw you, get out of here, he just smiles and laughs. Like he's a very funny characterization. But so that's her little thing. That all kind of ends with like, oh, she's got egg on her face, like he didn't want to get married in the first place. But the main story ends, like you said, with Denise showing up and just kind of saying, she has some line, and you're right that she does diffuse it and say she just wants to be friends, but she says, like, I'd rather have the real Dwayne than the
Daryl Walker or whatever.
Or whatever. And so, I feel like I feel the will they won't they coming off of them, like it's, again, Dwayne is the one.
I feel like they're writing it. I feel like Dwayne is acting it, and Denise is sort of riding the wave.
They do a good job with Dwayne in the acting and the writing, considering this is the early 90s. It's a college campus sitcom.
Yeah, this might even be 89.
Of making him horny and, aggressive, quote unquote, in that silly way that doesn't come across as particularly cringy. They just seem young and stupid.
Exactly. He's sort of like a dopey, unlucky in love kind of sad sack during this episode. And that's why, Denise is taking pity on him and being like, hey, you don't have to sit here alone on Valentine's Day because you tried some scheme that didn't work. We know who you are. And then the button is Whitley shows up with a corsage of all the red carnations.
Right. Looking for
Daryl Walker of the Charleston Walkers. And she says that, she's like, have you seen Daryl Walker of the Charleston Walkers? But she doesn't talk like that. Let me do that again. Let me find her. Hold on. I'm gonna find Whitley. Whitley. She's got this little nasally kind of. Yeah, I know. I keep sliding into that. She's
Annie Potts from Designing Women.
Y'all come back now. That's the wrong time. Oh, let me get there. I'm gonna get there. I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer. And she talks up in her nose like this. She's very nasal, and she says, have you seen Daryl Walker of the Charleston Walkers?
Yeah, you got the cadence is kind of off.
The cadence is wrong. Voice. I'm getting close.
And so that she, again, egg on her face. She fell for it. Like we said, this one, it's the radio station, in order to fuel this romantic farce, basically, which is fun. Like it is, and that's one thing that can happen.
Well, and what I like about this show, and what I liked about this show even more as time went on, and they retooled it, they brought in Debbie Allen as the showrunner, and she was on the show from season 2 on as well. Like what you can see in this season 1 episode is that Kadeem Hardison is like a Zach Morris waiting to happen.
Yeah.
That's the thing that this show needed to kick it into that next level.
I don't think he's waiting to happen. This is totally a Zach scheme.
Right, but they aren't writing the show in that way, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean? It's very clearly he's a secondary character to our main girls, and particularly our main girl.
In that sense, he's kind of like a Barney.
Yeah, and exactly, from How I Met Your Mother. But I think and in later seasons, Whitley and Dwayne Wayne do get together, and then they become this like central couple in the show, and they're, different culture clashes because she's from the South and he's not, all of that. So anyway, I think what you see in this is some real untapped potential in Dwayne Wayne.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not totally untapped. I see what you're saying, that the episode, it's fighting with the fact that Denise is ostensibly supposed to be the main character. But in this episode, I definitely see like everything with Dwayne and Ron, which is the huge chunk of the episode, is totally Zach and Screech out of Saved by the Bell.
Absolutely.
All right. Speaking of wacky kids in high school, let's bring it on home with...
And lusty lunches.
Yeah. Boy Meets World.
Season 2, episode 17, on the air.
Yeah, Boy Meets World, of course, takes place at John Adams High because the principal is played by William Daniels, who played John Adams in 1776. And their radio station...
That's really cute, but we're not yet at the point where Feeney is the principal, right? Isn't he still a teacher?
Sorry, the teacher.
Yeah.
Which makes it not make as much sense.
Sit down, John.
But their radio station is Patriot Radio.
That's right.
And so this one is, in a sense, it's a little bit like Saved by the Bell in the sense that the radio station has been dormant. It's been brought back, but not by students, by Mr. Feeney playing... he plays 3 things that we find out early in the episode that people don't like. Michael Bolton.
Yes.
Everybody, extreme shade being thrown at Michael Bolton. Everybody revolts.
This is before Andy Samberg brought him back.
Oh, long before. But still, this is when he was like a legitimate mainstream thing. I'm just saying shots fired at Michael Bolton. Like he was on the radio at this time and they were like, we don't like him. We're going to make fun of him in this episode.
Michael Bolton and Celine Dion, right? Like those were the ones that if you were kind of our age or a little bit younger, the stuff that your parents listened to on the easy listening adult contemporary station, those were it's like, how do you even like Celine Dion?
The next one he does is Perry Como. Now that is like
that was a throwback though.
Yeah.
And you saw, because the other teacher, like the young hip who talks with this, like
Joey
he's Fonzie.
Never
like where's this accent coming from? Yeah. But anyway, so he that's what gets him. Like he kind of shrugs off the Michael Bolton, like whatever, it's current music, it's fine. But then he plays Perry Como or whatever, and he's like, oh no.
And then there's a little button at the end of one of the scenes where he's like, all right, now for Menudo, right? So that's Mr. Feeney's tastes: Michael Bolton, Perry Como, and Menudo. And, the kids are all lamenting it, Shawn and Corey. And so, this teacher that it's just like you said, it always takes me by surprise. It's only because I think in the 90s, Pacino and De Niro were like the coolest guys in the world. And so they were just like, have him be like that, I guess, because it doesn't make sense. He's supposed to be the nice, even like Feeney calls him out as being the hippie teacher. Yeah. And he's like, hippies were my parents or whatever. But
he's like, that's more like my, what he says, it's more like my aunt,
my Aunt
Ruthie. Yeah, my Aunt Ruthie. And then later on, because the person who's the right age to actually be a hippie is Mr. Feeney.
And then he reveals that he banged Aunt Ruthie.
Right. Well, he was like, was your Aunt Ruthie at Woodstock? And he was like, it must have been a different Ruthie Turner. So that teacher, Mr. Hunter, who is the young cool teacher that for some reason just talks with that. That's Mr. Turner
accent. Turner.
Yeah,
sorry.
Shawn Hunter.
Okay, fair
Mr.
enough.
Turner.
He's like, well, why don't you guys take over the radio station? If you think that's something you might be interested in, I'll talk to Feeney and, we can make something happen here where you guys can be DJs maybe. And that's he just wants them to like get involved, right? That's the only thing. So again, this is a different take on it. I feel like all of our other episodes, it's gone without saying that the students do the radio stuff.
Yeah.
This is the only one where it's like, oh no, this is a radio station for teachers.
Well,
to play
no,
music.
there are, because they have that German show, like there's the German student who has a show that comes on after Mr. Feeney's show. And that's what Mr. Turner was saying. He was like, look, don't just sit around and complain. If you want to change something, get involved, be a part of it. Because Feeney was only doing a show to fill airtime because they didn't have, it was like during lunches, basically. There's kids in the hallway and kids are at lunch and whatever. Yeah. And he's doing a little radio show like that. This is not one that's being broadcast that's not like out. The standard. Yeah, that's being broadcast out anywhere. And so, Mr. Turner was like, don't throw stones. Like, you want to change something or you don't like something, get involved. And so that's why I was like, okay. And then they get picked to, when they say they're interested, Mr. Feeney's like, okay, great. You can take over this spot that I've been filling with random stuff.
A particular assignment, which is interviewing like a girl from the student government about they lost funding for their event and they're putting on a bake sale.
Right. They were going to have a freshman dance or something, and now they're not going to have a freshman or a sophomore dance. Right. They're going to do a sophomore bake sale because they didn't have enough money.
So this is like school news, basically.
Yes.
And it's boring. That's the problem.
Right. And she also is like giving one-word answers. So then Corey is trying to just pull something out of it. So, what's the profit margin on a cupcake? Just trying to like talk about something.
Yeah. And then they get a phone call. It's the wrong number. It's a German thing for the German kids show. And then they get a call from Spencer, one of the other kids in the school, who's asking if this girl that they're interviewing, if she's still dating, this
other guy,
if she's single.
And she's like, she blushes.
She loves it.
And she's like, no, actually, we broke up, last week.
She's ready. She says, like, I'm not seeing him anymore. I am single. I am interested in going out with you. I will meet you at the soda machine right now. Yeah. She says.
And she gets up and leaves.
So this kid identifies himself as Spencer. Do we understand, do you think, that she knows this kid? Or, okay, I couldn't tell if this was a sight unseen, like, hey,
all
works
the same
for me.
School. Like, were there kids at your school that you didn't know?
Well, not really, but there were 150 kids in my graduating class. And so I do wonder if bigger schools, I certainly didn't know every kid in every grade. So to me, it could go either way. And Spencer is a pretty unique name, but if someone got on and said like, hi, I'm Michael, do you want to go out? Like, I don't know that I'd be so confident.
She might think it's one Michael and it turns out to be another Michael. Yeah. I mean, who knows? I took it that she knew who the kid was, and my high school was a little bigger than yours, but and I feel like I pretty much, especially by the time I was a senior,
frankly,
like I knew
lots
of people.
Her reaction would go from extreme to insane if she did not know who this kid was that was calling in. But speaking about the herd mentality of the student body in these sitcoms, we have this girl leaves to go, meet Spencer, and Shawn, right, is like, this gives me an idea. Corey's like, well, look, we're here with a certain assignment. We can't use this as some kind of weird, matchmaking service or something. And then there's a knock on the door and 5 pretty girls, all like 3 feet taller than Shawn and Corey.
Well, that's because this is that season. We've talked about this before on the podcast, where season 2, they decided to like age them up. And so they were going into 7th grade and they went to high school. Yeah. So they're in this high school that's 7th grade to 12th grade, which that's going to come back again at the end. Okay. They talk about it.
Yeah. So these girls come in and they're like talking in this weird sex kitten voice, even though she's like 15. She's like,
I just want to meet somebody.
Yeah. She's like, is this where we go to be on the radio and talk to boys?
Yes.
And Corey's like, yes, it is.
Come on in.
Yeah. And so the first one is this girl, I think her name is, she says like Judy Fontana?
Yeah, something like
Fontana.
that. But doesn't she do like a little, hi, I'm Judy Fontana.
Yes.
And I like long walks on the beach and getting my hair done.
Here's the thing.
You
They
know
just,
what I mean?
they
It's
ask
like a
her
little
name.
video.
She says Fontana, and they act like she just said pussy galore. Like, Shawn goes like, well, if it isn't, it should be. And then when she says her name again, Shawn and Corey in unison go, it sure is. You know, like, gee, like it's a normal name. Calm down. And so, yeah, the idea is like, we just get to see this one girl, but I guess we understand that they're just going to like use their show. It's lunchtime lust.
Yep.
And they have these girls get on and like
talk about themselves, do a little like video dating profile, announcement about
like
themselves.
Those Playboy Channel, profiles where
my friend,
I'm just a big goofball.
Yes, my friend Sarah and I, we used to, when I lived in Amsterdam, we used to go out to, dinner and bars and whatever. And the two of us we would crack ourselves up. We would stand in a corner or sit in a booth and for hours just like make up these profiles like, hi, and do it like as though we were from 1990 and we had like big frizzy hair.
Yeah. So Mr. Feeney does not appreciate lunchtime lust.
No,
right?
Mr. Feeney wants to shut it down. He comes in and shuts it down and is like, this is not continuing. You were meant to do the news. This isn't what you were, given. And isn't something said that's a little bit risque, and that's why they get shut down? What it is
the Corey and this girl are going to start making out on the air.
Oh,
Corey
right.
goes,
so that you can know how to, because like, somebody calls in and says, hey, is she a good kisser? And he's like, well, I'm not sure. You want to try? And she was like, okay.
Yeah.
And
Corey
that's
goes,
when it got busted up.
I don't know what to tell him. And she's like, well, maybe I can show you. And then, Corey closes his eyes. Mr. Feeney pops up in front of him.
Yes.
And he shuts it down. And then.
And starts the German show early.
Yeah. And so, okay. Reset, act break. Back in the classroom after Mr. Feeney's class, he says, okay, everybody, see you next time when we're going to learn about the Bill of Rights. And that's when he's like, oh no. And Shawn and Corey start, they get all kind of satisfied with themselves. Oh, Shawn, yes, Corey. Do you remember what the Bill of Rights is about? Do you remember what it says in that very First Amendment? And who would have thought that Corey Matthews from Boy Meets World would basically presage the alt-right movement, right? The entire...
what do you mean who would have thought? Apparently he's running in that movement out in California for office.
Yeah. This notion that the First Amendment, right, the freedom of speech, quote unquote, gives you this
Carte
guarantee
blanche, yeah.
to, do and say whatever you want without any repercussions whatsoever is, very much alive and well here in Corey and Shawn's ideology.
Right. Well, and then you've got Feeney doing the exact opposite of what you try to do when you get kids, young people questioning their own rights and what applies to them as, under 18 minor children in this country. He's like, well, it doesn't apply to kids, which isn't true. So then it's like, oh, well, we're going to do our report and we'll just see who it applies to. So there.
Yeah. They appeal to the teacher, Mr. Turner,
right,
to talk to Mr. Feeney for them and get them back on the air. Is that how they get back on the air and then they do the crazy pirate radio? Or they get back on the air and then they...
So basically a similar thing happens in this kind of moving into, Act 2 as what happens at the beginning. They're sitting around kvetching about getting kicked off the air and, not having the rights and, we should be able to have this and whatever. And again, Mr. Turner overhears and he's like, guys, why don't you talk to Feeney about it? And they're like, he doesn't listen to us. He doesn't think kids have any rights. He doesn't think we know anything. He'll never listen to us. And they're just writing him off as like a dead end. And Mr. Turner's like, well, why don't I give it a whirl? and we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what we can do. He's cautiously optimistic, and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. You go ahead and try. It's never going to work. Feeney hates us. Feeney thinks we're idiots, and he's like, just don't do anything. I'm gonna at least try. And they totally ignore him because they think he's not going to be successful. So then the next day, they have now made a plan, and their plan is to tie up the German kid and take the radio setup. They ask one of the little nerds who kind of appears in this show over and over again. He's a regular guest character.
Yeah.
They ask him to set up the studio.
Mobile studio.
In the janitor's closet.
They pull a Christian Slater from Pump Up the Volume. The whole second half of this episode is just like Pump Up the Volume. It's pirate radio, right? Christian Slater was Harry Hardon. They're, whoever they're going to be, they get on the radio, and all they're really doing is just like playing rock music and just saying like, everybody dance, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty innocent.
Yeah, it is. It's not, but they're, they have not waited for the conversation.
Commandeered the airwaves.
And so what happens right before they burst onto the airwaves and start their, loud music playing and everything else, is that Mr. Turner follows through, speaks to Feeney.
Right. Gets more latitude.
And Feeney agrees, hey, you're right. They don't necessarily need to do, lusty lunch, but if they want to be a part of it and they want to make the news more fun, then we can definitely support that, and whatever, they should get another chance, basically. And then boom, pirate radio comes on the airwaves, and they tried to hold us down. They can't keep us from talking. We're going to do what we want. Who knows where we are, just like you said, from Pump Up the Volume. And then Mr. Turner's like, Jesus, guys,
they're broadcasting going like, oh, we're in the gymnasium locker room, or are we, Mr. Feeney, but he eventually tracks them down to the closet. We get what I would think was a Jurassic Park reference, the kind of funny line where Mr. Feeney is staring at them like point blank through the closet door, and Shawn goes, don't move, and maybe he can't see us.
Yeah.
Right? This is probably around Jurassic Park time. And then so the final act of this is going to be, they've been caught. They're in their original radio station. We should say we didn't do a, spotlight on the sort of accoutrement. This one is our most sort of like, it's just a classroom with a little bit of radio stuff. Yes. There's a little bit of tech, but this one is pretty much just
not even
a classroom.
This is a closet.
Well, they were in the closet. Now for the final act, they're back in the classroom, I thought, when they sit down with Mr. Turner. They're in trouble. They have to come clean.
I thought you meant the actual radio station. We talked about the other radio stations with all.
Right.
And this one was the smallest and most cramped. And then they got even smaller when they went into the actual janitor's closet. But this radio station, this little school radio booth, is truly set up in probably what used to be a closet. Like, it is very small.
Yeah, it's just a little desk with a phone and a little thing on it. But so they're back in their original station thing, and they're like, look, Mr. Turner, we didn't want to cause any trouble. We just wanted to make a splash. They're like Jason Bateman and his friends in the college episode. We just want to make a splash. We want to find ourselves and know who we are. We're just 7th graders. We don't know.
Yeah,
we don't
nobody
know our place.
even notices us here.
Yeah, and so very interesting solution to this whole situation we've got here. Mr. Turner is in a position where he needs to make these boys understand that they don't need to do weird stuff like lusty lunch to get attention.
Right.
He needs to make Mr. Feeney understand that the boys could benefit from being on the radio, and he needs to just kind of mold them into an acceptable radio show. So his way of doing that is to clandestinely record them as they start like bearing their souls, as they start going like, yeah, it's just like we don't know what to do, and we don't know if anybody likes us, and he's just secretly recording them and broadcasting broadcasting them live
say,
to the school.
Not recording. He leans, just like so many episodes, right? He leans on the mic button and sends them out live.
Yeah.
So now their lunchtime show is still a call-in show. Don't ask me how the kids in school are calling in, because this is before cell phones.
The schools had payphones.
Payphones, yeah, I guess.
My school had a few payphones, yeah.
Yeah, ours were not.
You would always have one by the office.
Yeah, ours were out like on the street, like off campus.
I feel like, most schools I went to would usually have a payphone by the office.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, we didn't have those. He leans on the button, and they start bearing their soul, and then throughout this episode, there's been these shots of other kids in the hallways and classes listening to the shows, like looking up at the
again, the herd mentality, rocking out when they're playing music,
exactly.
Getting hot and horny when they're talking to the
covering
girls.
their ears when Michael Bolton is played and groaning. Mm-hmm. But so you get all these kids just sort of stopping at their lockers and looking at the speaker that's on the wall. And like tuning in, like, relating. Oh, you're not the only. I'm not the only one who feels seen. Who feels unseen and who feels like I'm left out or whatever. And so then that's their new show. That's
their happy ending. There's a button at the end with Robin Leach because there's been a crazy sea story with the dopey brother. But this one,
no Topanga.
Oh, yeah. Wow. No Topanga at all. That's interesting. Didn't notice that. So, this one, again, like this, it's a completely different take on it. We get, frankly, we get the freedom of speech angle. Yeah. Which
they're younger kids, too. Everybody else has been senior in high school, or later in high school and college.
Yeah. And so this is definitely like, it's just like a learning moment for them. That's basically the function it serves. And it's not like, this is not one where it's like the radio station itself is like, just like we said at the top. Like, it's a new idea or anything like that.
No, this is like a growth moment. Kind of similar with Family Ties, right? Like it was the radio station itself is just the vehicle through which this, life lesson for Alex happens.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So what do we think? Looking back over these, this is definitely an interesting one. Lots of overlap, but also like definitely different takes on it.
Yeah. Man, I actually really enjoyed the Welcome Back, Kotter. I thought that one, it was the most involved in terms of like the characters doing things at the radio station. It's really interesting how all of these, maybe not a different world, but 3 out of the 4 of these had a main character really just not involved at all in the story. And this radio station being a project that everybody could kind of get in on allowed for one of the main gang to like not be there for an episode.
Yeah, well, Family Ties, I mean, just the siblings.
But exactly. They have one scene where they stuck their head out and they're like, time for dinner, dinner's ready or whatever. So they really weren't in it at all, where usually it is much more about the family. That was just like an Alex episode. But looking back, I really had fun watching the Welcome Back, Kotter, for all of the ridiculousness that they do with his stories and the pacing of those stories just being stretched out that he tells, his uncle jokes or whatever. But I don't know. I think they did the best job with all the radio station fun and having it be, it's this competition about the ratings, but like the network parody part of it and, having Horshack be like go a little crazy and try to turn into a cult leader. I don't know. With the radio station trope, I think you can kind of go wacky or you can go kind of straight and take it in a different direction like they did with Family Ties, but it wasn't even really about the radio, right? So all right. I've said it 3 times. Sweatwork.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. That Welcome Back, Kotter episode was really fun. Just Horshack's scarf alone did it for me. That jacket and like scarf combo. Yeah. The fashion is on point. And the whole thing, if we're including Saved by the Bell from last week, I might kind of make that my MVP because that had the thing of Jesse as the reporter and Lisa as the fashion, Kelly Desire. And so this Welcome Back Kotter kind of did the closest, of all of these ones to that, with Barbarino off camera as the woman on the street interviewer and Epstein's crazy laundry advice and, Washington.
Not even laundry, like so many things. Like, here's how you save money.
Yeah, that one. And just like you said, going on that fun little arc where Horshack goes from being, guileless, terrible radio personality to being all dejected, to losing his mind, to turning into this spiritual guru. All very silly and fun. And the Family Ties episode, frankly, like that show is always pretty good, but it was fun because of how insane it was, but it was not like a solid episode of that for the same reason that it didn't have any real insight because it was so odd. It was all him holding hands with this 40-year-old woman and then saying, but we're just friends. Like, what are we supposed to get?
No, I mean, look, we're like kind of early season 2 there in Family Ties. They've already realized the magic that is Michael J. Fox. And this was just, one of the situations. Yeah, rather this time, instead of him being wrong about a bunch of stuff and, having horrible opinions that he needs to kind of grow out of, this time he just gets wrapped up with an older woman.
Yeah, just kind of gets in over his head a little bit. But and the solution is just her coming to her senses and realizing, oh, wait.
Right, it doesn't follow. But there's a funny little thing about the guy who created Family Ties talked about the writing process, and he said we always had 6 scenes and a tag, and the tag was always Alex apologizes. And that card just stayed up on the board because that was how they, wrote their episodes. This one didn't follow that at all.
Yeah, but like we said, it's fun to have the radio as the matchmaker in that, as opposed to like the sort of occupational thing and the other ones, just like, all those different takes on it.
Yeah.
All right, so much for the school radio stations. Next week, it's time for another mixtape.
Mixtape time!
Yep, we will be revisiting all of our Martin conversations. We are going to be re-airing the 4 times that we have discussed one of our most beloved sitcoms from the 90s, Martin. And, of course, we will also be throwing down in some sort of quiz, some sort of test of our Martin knowledge. So next week, all things Mr. Lawrence and his lovely wife, Gina. And we will see you then on the Sitcom Study. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.